Do you know that some SASSA grant beneficiaries now have only 30 days to act before their payments could be stopped? Many South Africans depend on social grants every month to survive. For some families, that grant money pays for food, electricity, and medicine. But right now, an important notice has been issued, and ignoring it could put your grant at risk. The South African Social Security Agency, SASSA, has started sending out notices asking certain beneficiaries to visit their nearest SASSA office within 30 days for a grant review. If the review is ignored, the agency may suspend or even cancel the grant until the situation is resolved. Many people think these notices are scams or mistakes, so they ignore them. But SASSA has made it clear that these messages are part of an official process required by law. So the big question is this: have you received a message, letter, or phone call asking you to visit a SASSA office? If yes, you need to understand exactly what it means and what you must do next. Subscribe now to get notified of important information about SASSA grants and updates that affect millions of South Africans. Stay with us, because in the next part, we explain why SASSA is calling beneficiaries for reviews and why ignoring it could stop your payments. Many people are worried when they hear about grant reviews. Some think their grants are being taken away, but the truth is a bit different. SASSA says grant reviews are a normal process required by the Social Assistance Act. The purpose is simple: to make sure that grants are still going to people who qualify for them. Sometimes circumstances change. A person may find a job, receive other income, or their personal information may no longer match the records in the system. When that happens, SASSA needs to verify the details again. This is why the agency sends notices asking certain beneficiaries to come for a review. Officials explain that the process helps protect the grant system from fraud and ensures that the money reaches those who truly need it. In fact, investigations in recent years found that some beneficiaries had undeclared income or incorrect information, which triggered the need for reviews. But here is something very important. A review does not automatically mean your grant will stop. It simply means SASSA needs to confirm your information. However, if someone ignores the review notice completely, that is when serious problems can begin. In the next part, we will reveal what happens if you ignore the 30-day notice from SASSA. Ignoring a SASSA review notice may seem harmless at first. Some people think the agency will simply forget. Unfortunately, that is not how the system works. According to SASSA guidelines, when beneficiaries receive a notice asking them to visit a SASSA office for a grant review, they are expected to respond within 30 days. If they do not respond, the agency may take the next step. First, the grant may be temporarily suspended. This means the monthly payment could stop until the review is completed. If the person still does not respond, the grant could eventually lapse or cancel. SASSA officials say the review process exists to verify information and prevent abuse of the system. But they also emphasize that the goal is not to punish beneficiaries. In fact, if someone reports to the SASSA office and completes the review, payments can usually continue once their eligibility is confirmed. That is why the agency keeps urging beneficiaries to take these notices seriously and respond quickly. But many people still ask another important question: how will you know if your grant has been selected for a review? In the next part, we explain the signs that your SASSA grant may be under review right now. Not every beneficiary is currently under review, but some people are receiving notices without fully understanding what they mean. So how can you know if your grant has been selected? SASSA usually sends a formal notification to the beneficiary. This may come as an SMS, letter, or other communication, telling the person to visit a SASSA office for a review. The message normally includes instructions and a deadline. The agency is required to notify beneficiaries before any grant suspension or cancellation takes place. Regulations state that beneficiaries must receive official communication before any action is taken on their grant. This is why it is very important not to ignore messages that appear to come from SASSA. In some provinces, thousands of beneficiaries have already been contacted. For example, reports from Mpumalanga showed that over 12,000 beneficiaries were notified to visit SASSA offices for review, while only a small number had completed the process so far. This shows that many people are still delaying their response, and that delay could put their grants in danger. In the next part, we explain what documents you must bring when visiting a SASSA office for a grant review. If you receive a message asking you to visit a SASSA office for a grant review, the next question many people ask is simple: what documents should you bring? SASSA officials say beneficiaries must bring documents that help confirm their personal and financial information. This is important because the review process checks whether the grant is still going to someone who qualifies for it. In most cases, beneficiaries should bring their South African ID or Smart ID card, proof of residence, and any documents showing their current financial situation. For some grants, SASSA may also request bank statements, proof of income, or medical documents if the grant is related to disability. The goal of these documents is not to make the process difficult. Instead, they help the agency verify that the grant is still valid and being paid to the right person. Many beneficiaries worry when they hear the word review, but SASSA has explained that the process is mainly about confirming information already on file. If everything checks out, the grant usually continues without interruption. However, there is something very important that many beneficiaries do not know. Even if you can't travel to the SASSA office yourself, there is still a way to complete the review. In the next part, we explain how someone can visit SASSA on your behalf if you are unable to go. Many elderly beneficiaries or people with health challenges worry about one thing when they hear about grant reviews. What if you cannot travel to the SASSA office yourself? SASSA has already provided a solution for this situation. According to the agency's rules, beneficiaries can appoint someone called a procurator to act on their behalf during the review process. A procurator is a trusted person who is allowed to represent the beneficiary at the SASSA office. This could be a family member or another responsible individual. However, there are important guidelines that must be followed. The person representing the beneficiary must carry the necessary documents and authorization, including identification and the documents needed for the grant review. This allows SASSA officials to verify the information properly while still helping beneficiaries who cannot travel. The agency introduced this option because it understands that many grant recipients are elderly or living in rural areas. SASSA has repeatedly urged beneficiaries not to ignore review notices simply because they cannot travel. Instead, they should arrange for a procurator to assist them. Before we continue, remember to subscribe now so you don't miss important updates about SASSA grants and government announcements. In the next part, we look at real numbers showing how many beneficiaries have already been contacted for grant reviews. Many people think these review notices are rare, but the numbers tell a very different story. In the province of Mpumalanga alone, official progress reports revealed that 12,151 beneficiaries were notified to visit SASSA offices for grant reviews.
Out of that number, 2,303 beneficiaries completed their review process, while 221 grants eventually lapsed because the process was not completed. These figures show something important. Many people are still ignoring the notices or delaying their response. SASSA officials say this is risky because the review process exists to protect the system and ensure that grants go to people who qualify. The agency has made it clear that South Africa's social grant system supports millions of citizens and it must be protected from fraud or incorrect payments. At the same time, SASSA also recognizes that most beneficiaries depend heavily on their grants for daily survival. That is why officials continue encouraging people to respond quickly when they receive review notices. Completing the review early helps prevent delays or interruptions in payments. But there is another important detail that many beneficiaries should understand. Receiving a review notice does not automatically mean you did something wrong. In the next part, we explain why many beneficiaries are selected for reviews even when they are fully eligible. One of the biggest fears many beneficiaries have is this: if SASSA calls me for a review, does it mean they suspect fraud? In many cases, the answer is no. SASSA officials say some reviews happen simply because the system requires periodic checks to keep records accurate. These reviews can be triggered for several reasons. Sometimes it happens when a beneficiary's personal information changes, such as a new address or updated bank details. In other cases, it may happen when the agency needs to update old records that have not been verified for a long time. There are also times when SASSA conducts routine checks across certain regions or grant categories. This means that even fully eligible beneficiaries may receive a notice asking them to visit an office. The purpose is not to punish people, but to ensure the grant system remains fair and transparent. Officials have also explained that before any grant is suspended or cancelled, SASSA must investigate and verify all facts surrounding the grant as required by the regulations governing social assistance. This rule exists to protect beneficiaries. But there are still mistakes many people make during the review process that can delay their payments. In the next part, we reveal the most common mistakes beneficiaries must avoid during a SASSA grant review. When beneficiaries receive a notice to visit SASSA for a review, many people make simple mistakes that later cause serious problems. One common mistake is waiting too long before responding. Some people think they still have plenty of time, so they delay visiting the SASSA office, but the 30-day deadline can pass quickly. Once the deadline passes, the grant may be suspended while the case is being reviewed again. Another mistake is arriving at the office without the required documents. If the necessary documents are missing, the review may not be completed that day. That means the beneficiary might need to return again, which can delay the process. There are also cases where people ignore official messages, thinking they are scams. While it is true that scams exist, SASSA reminds beneficiaries that official notices should not be ignored. If there is doubt, the safest option is to visit the nearest SASSA office and confirm. These are easy to avoid mistakes, but they can lead to payment delays if not handled properly. The most important thing is to respond quickly and follow the instructions provided in the notice. In the next part, we explain what SASSA officials are saying directly to beneficiaries about this review process. SASSA officials have been very clear about one thing. Beneficiaries should not panic, but they must take the review process seriously. The agency understands that millions of South Africans rely on social grants every month. These payments support elderly citizens, people living with disabilities, and families caring for children. Because of this, SASSA says it is committed to making sure that qualified beneficiaries continue receiving their grants on time. However, the agency also warns that the system must be protected from abuse. Officials have explained that while most beneficiaries receive grants legally, there are some cases where people continue receiving grants even after their circumstances change. For example, if someone begins earning income above the qualifying limit but does not report it, the system may detect the change during a review. That is why the agency performs these checks. SASSA says the goal is not to punish beneficiaries, but to maintain fairness and protect the integrity of the grant system. At the same time, SASSA also recognizes that most beneficiaries depend heavily on their grants for daily survival. That is why officials continue encouraging people to respond quickly when they receive review notices. Completing the review early helps prevent delays or interruptions in payments. But there is another important detail that many beneficiaries should understand. Receiving a review notice does not automatically mean you did something wrong. In the next part, we explain why many beneficiaries are selected for reviews even when they are fully eligible.
Whenever important announcements are made about grants, scammers often try to take advantage of the situation. That is why beneficiaries must be careful when receiving messages that claim to come from SASSA. SASSA has warned the public that official messages will never ask for banking passwords, PIN numbers, or personal financial details through random links. If you receive a message asking you to click a suspicious link or send personal information, that is likely a scam. Instead, the safest way to confirm information is to visit the nearest SASSA office or use official government communication channels. Another important tip is to never allow strangers to assist you with grant matters, especially if they ask for payment. SASSA services related to grant reviews are free of charge. Beneficiaries should also be careful when sharing their personal documents. Only provide information directly to SASSA officials or authorized representatives. Staying alert helps protect your grant and prevents criminals from exploiting vulnerable beneficiaries. But even with all these warnings, some beneficiaries still wonder what will happen if their grant is temporarily suspended during the review process. In the next part, we explain what steps can be taken to restore your grant if payments stop. If a grant is suspended because the review process was not completed in time, it does not always mean the grant is gone forever. In many cases, the situation can still be corrected. SASSA advises beneficiaries to visit their nearest office as soon as possible if their grant payment suddenly stops. Officials will then review the case and confirm whether the beneficiary still qualifies for the grant. If the beneficiary provides the required documents and the information is verified, the grant may be reinstated. However, the process can take time, which is why SASSA strongly encourages beneficiaries to complete the review before the deadline. Responding early helps prevent unnecessary stress and delays. The agency has also reminded beneficiaries that every case is handled according to the regulations governing social assistance. This means SASSA must investigate and verify all facts before permanently cancelling any grant. These protections exist to ensure fairness for all beneficiaries. But there is one final message that every grant recipient should hear clearly today. In the next part, we bring everything together and explain why this 30-day notice should not be ignored by anyone receiving a SASSA grant. Even if you have not received a review notice yet, this information is still very important. That is because the review process can affect any beneficiary at any time. SASSA regularly updates its records to ensure that grants are reaching the people who qualify for them. If a notice arrives, responding quickly protects your payments and avoids unnecessary problems. Ignoring the notice, on the other hand, can lead to suspension or cancellation of the grant. For many families, that monthly payment is essential for daily survival. It helps pay for groceries, transport, school needs, and medical care. That is why SASSA continues reminding beneficiaries to check their messages carefully and respond if they are contacted for a review. The process may seem inconvenient, but it exists to keep the grant system working for everyone. Completing the review is often simple when the correct documents are provided. And once the information is verified, beneficiaries can continue receiving the support they depend on. Now let us close with an important reminder that every SASSA beneficiary should share with family and friends. Let us quickly summarize the most important points. SASSA is currently encouraging beneficiaries not to ignore the 30-day notice for social grant reviews. These notices are sent when the agency needs to verify a beneficiary's information. Responding within the deadline helps ensure that grants continue without interruption. If the notice is ignored, the grant may be suspended or eventually lapse until the situation is resolved. Beneficiaries who cannot visit the SASSA office themselves can appoint a procurator to represent them, as long as the proper guidelines are followed. Most importantly, beneficiaries should remain cautious of scams and only trust official communication channels. The goal of this process is to protect the grant system and ensure that qualified South Africans continue receiving the support they depend on. If you know someone who receives a SASSA grant, please share this information with them. It could help them avoid losing their payments. And if you have not done so yet, remember to subscribe to this channel so you never miss important updates about SASSA grants, payment dates, and government announcements that affect millions of South Africans. Stay informed, stay safe, and stay connected with us for more updates.
Till next time, bye.